Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Vanachari Jayorat Hamadhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallava Girivaradhari Jana Vallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Vanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitya Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Bol, Nitya Gora Hari Bol, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Janitya Lila Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Asata Shishimad Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Janitya Lila Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Asata Shishimad Bhakti Saranta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT founder Acharya. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namachaya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gogopinath Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Raj Govardhana Ki Jai. Vrindavan Mathura Dhama Ki Jai. Mayapur Navadvip Dhama Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dhama Ki Jai. Shri Ayodhya Dhama Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Yamuna Maya Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Jai. Transcendental Prasadam Distribution Ki Jai. Shri Harinama Sankirtan Yagna Ki Jai. Cow Protection Ki Jai. New Govardhan Farm Community Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agnati Mirandasya Gyananjaya Cakshur Umrita Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, verse 27. The chapter is called Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. Vaikarikad vikurvanan manastatvam ajayata yatsankalpa vikalpabhyam vātate kama sambhavaha. Vaikarikad vikurvanam manastatvam ajayata yatsankalpa vikalpabhyam vātate kama sambhavaha. Vaikarikad vikurvanam manastatvam ajayate yatsankalpa vikalpabhyam vātate kama sambhavaha. Vaikarikad vikurvanam manastatvam ajayata yatsankalpa vikalpabhyam vātate kama sambhavaha. Vaikirakat. From the false ego of goodness. Vikurvanat. Undergoing transformation. Manaha, the mind. Tattvam, principle. Ajayata, evolved. Yat, whose. Sankalpa, thoughts. Vikalpabhyam, by reflections. Vartate, happens. Kama sambhavaha, the rise of desire. Translation and purport by Shiv. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. Please repeat. From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. Purport. The symptoms of the mind are determination and rejection, which are due to different kinds of desires. We desire that which is favorable to our sense gratification, and we reject that which is not favorable to sense gratification. The material mind is not fixed, but the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, as long as the mind is on the material platform, it is hovering. And all this rejection and acceptance is asat, temporary. It is stated that he whose mind is not fixed in Krishna consciousness must hover between acceptance and rejection. However advanced a man is in academic qualifications, as long as he is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will simply accept and reject, and will never be able to fix his mind on a particular subject matter. I read the verse again. From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. So, this is a very special reminder about the nature of the mind. As we know, Lord Shri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, made it very clear in the Bhagavad Gita. I like to read this because it's very important. It's a very short purport by Srila Prabhupada. We know this verse, but it's important to remind ourselves, especially in relationship to this and related to this chapter, and Kapil Dev explains the origin of the mind and how it's affecting us and what that means. So Krishna says here in Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, Bandhur Atmat Manastasya Yenat Maivatma Jitaha Anat Manastu Shatrutve Vate Tatmaiva Sattuva. Translation. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. purport by Srila Prabhupada. The purpose of practicing Eightfold Yoga is to control the mind in order to make it a friend in discharging the human mission. Unless the mind is controlled, the practice of yoga, for sure, is simply a waste of time. One who cannot control his mind lives always with the greatest enemy, and thus his life, its mission are spoiled. The constitutional position of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior. As long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, etc. But when the mind is conquered, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the personality of Godhead, who is situated within the heart of everyone as Parama Atma. Real yoga practice entails meeting the Parama Atma within the heart, then following his dictation. For one who takes to Krishna consciousness directly, perfect surrender to dictation of the Lord follows automatically. I collected a few examples and stories from Mahabharata, and I'm trying to reflect on this message here. And Krishna and Kapila Dev explains nicely about the nature of the mind and what it does. So the mind, born from false ego, we call it ahankara. Ahankara is a false ego. So the mind is born from ahankara, the false sense of I am this body, I am this identity. This world is for my enjoyment. Therefore, the mind has a built-in defect. It operates only two functions: sankalpa, acceptance. Yes, I like this. Vikalpa, rejection. No, I don't like that. From these two movements of the psychic responses, acceptance and rejection, kama sambhavaha, the birth of desire, manifests. Kapila Dev explains the false ego of goodness, initial stages, is actually programmable, just like a computer can be programmed, the software. So it requires wisdom and knowledge in our case, because once we realize the nature of the mind and how it is affecting every action, every desire we have, it's coming from acceptance or rejection. And one has to be not only wise and knowledgeable, but also have the spiritual strength. In other words, have to be a process, a method by which we can control the mind. Therefore, there are many effective ways, but the most effective ways, as Sri Prahlad Maharaj mentions in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 9 limbs of devotional service. sorry, I just, which I like to read because it's very important to kind of connect the dots together with this, because it's not just one or two. As devotees, we're realizing the danger of the uncontrolled mind. And it can be quite difficult, and the consequences are very heavy. Even psychology, modern psychology, realizing that people don't have much of a discrimination or understanding of morality, or just simply basic etiquette of human life, how to live in a society. They often, the mind is not well controlled. They don't have a basic education, for example, or they don't have moral principles. So they can act in a very animalistic way, unfortunately, because of the uncontrolled mind, accepting and rejecting. And it's like very dangerous, just like very whimsical even. So Srimad Bhagavatam, so this is for the Vaishnava students. 7th canto, chapter 5, verses 23-24, as Prahlad Maharaj explains, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada, Sevanam, Achanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So, Shravanam, hearing about the Lord's names, forms, qualities, and pastimes. So the mind requires engagement. If we have positive engagement, then we can hold of it. Then becomes a great friend, as Krishna says. It can become a great friend, the greatest friend. Not the other way around. It can become the greatest enemy. Kirtanam, glorifying or chanting about the Lord, chanting of the holy names, chanting bhajana, chanting songs by great acharyas. Vishnu smaranam, remembering, constantly remembering the Lord. Pada sevanam, serving the Lord's lotus feet, serving. Archanam, deity worship, offering worship to the Lord, often in a temple or altar, home altar. Vandanam, praying, offering prayers and obeisances. Dasyam, performing service as a faithful servant. Sakyam, friendship, considering the Lord as one's best friend. Atmanivedanam, complete surrender, offering everything, even oneself, to the Lord. So this is a very powerful method, as we all know. There are so many examples in the Shastras to control the mind successfully. It is not an easy thing because, especially in this day and age, where we are bombarded with sensuality and temptations, and our consciousness is very much affected by mundane atmosphere, upbringing, education, families, communities, societies, very much in the uncontrolled senses and uncontrolled mind. And even ordinary society recognizes controlling the mind to some extent. Therefore, there are human laws and rules and regulations, legislations, control, constantly restricting the whimsical nature of the mind, somehow or other, some restriction, always there. Their family traditions, social traditions, they all have a reason. It's not just because the way they are, but there is a reason to control the human psychic. Otherwise, we'll be animalistic, unfortunately. The other day, I was doing some gardening along my Tulsi garden there, And in the evening, I saw a couple of bandicoots coming and raiding my vegetables. And I noticed that they're very greedy. They bite on one leaf, another leaf, another leaf. They're not satisfied. Accepting and rejecting, accepting and rejecting. And I realized that this is the nature of a human mind. It is no discrimination unless there is a superior knowledge, transcendental knowledge, which is coming down obviously from the authorities. Humans may manufacture some principles in our society and communities, laws, law and order, to restrict the human mind. Otherwise, imagine lawlessness. That's all because of the madness of the mind. The mind is really just a function. We're not the mind, as Krishna also says in many places in the Bhagavatam. Kapila Dev makes it very clear. We are not the mind. Mind is a facility born of false ego to accept and reject. So it's not enough to be academically qualified or even having nice qualities to subdue the mind. We need to have a method, a process, a very effective process. And the best process is, as Prahlad Maharaj mentions, the 9 limbs of devotional service. And of course, out of all, Shravanam, Kirtanam, hearing and chanting comes out as a prime. Careful chanting of the holy names on a daily basis, especially for sadhakas, because we are just getting purified. We are in the process of getting purified from this illusory bodily conception of life. As we know, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that we are not this material, mortal, psychophysiological makeup. We are the pure jiva, atma, pure souls. But the body is like, has a function, there's a purpose here, obviously. And the physical body is like a hardware, and the mind, the psychological disposition is like a software. We can program it with education, with our cultural setting, with our association, with our company. But the best way to program it is saintly association, because the mind will be purified and becomes the best friend, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, can become a best friend also. So it's like a platform to serve Krishna, or deny the transcendental reality, which absolutely necessary for the soul. So we can living entity can become quite whimsical and disrespectful and offensive to the laws of nature. We have no discrimination. So chanting of the holy names not only purifies the different layers of contamination, especially ahankara, the false ego, but also fixes the mind. We have to fix the mind. And back to my garden story, there was a rope on the garden loose, and the bandicoots jumping one plant to the other, biting this, biting. I couldn't even stop because they're very quick. And the bandicoot almost got entangled in the rope and slashing the rest of the vegetables. Oh my God, I said, that's it. Then I picked up the rope and tied it very tight so it couldn't do anything anymore. Then I got the realization on the spot that we have to control the mind with the rope of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, the mind is like a bandicoot or possum. Possums are very famous. They eat anything. Pick on the vegetables, pick on this, pick on that, and not satisfied with one. And ruining the whole garden within minutes. So this shows the uncontrolled mind, accepting and rejecting, accepting and rejecting. We have to rise above this. there's a process here. And we have to remind ourselves on a daily basis by careful hearing and chanting and remembering smaranam. And of course, the 9 limbs, which kind of involves entire devotional service. Archanam, you can see worshipping Krishna. There's so many different kinds of activities. Padasevanam. Sankyam, we're making friends with the Lord and the devotees. So all these are very important aspects, I would say, angas of devotional service, by which we can somehow or other subdue the mind and control it and keep on track on the way back home, back to Godhead. Because until we have this human psychophysiological existence, we are not this, but we have it. We just have the mind, and we have to be careful now how we use it. We have to program it accordingly. Just like an IT engineer, he knows exactly how to code. Otherwise, it's going to be dysfunction. There'll be problems. So the mind has to be programmed by Krishna consciousness, Divya Jnana. Otherwise, we cannot see things clearly. We have to have a clear mind. Jnana Cakśusha, seeing through the eyes of knowledge, transcendental knowledge. And in the association of devotees, we're getting more strength, determination. So, and that way, we're able to create psychic, in other words, emotions that favorable. In other words, we can control the mind, hold the mind. Just like a little child, see? Srila Prabhupada used to bring this example often. The mind is like a child, see? It doesn't mean bad or good. We just have to be controlled and trained. And we're not the mind, we're not this, we're not that. But by superior intelligence given by the Shastras, the spiritual master, Guru Sadhu Shastra, we have some understanding the nature of the mind, the impulses, psychic impulses, which way we want to go. And you can see we are confronted with choices every moment, not just every day, every moment. Either we choose Krishna or choosing some kind of meaningless activity or sense gratification. And because we have this body and we have this mind, naturally we tend to levitate to sense gratification. We want to enjoy something, either physical or mental or some kind of sense gratification, stimulations. And the worst, when one engages in sinful activities, that obviously is already downgraded. The person lost all control. So that's a very risky position, because the Vaishnavas are very cautious to uphold the Dharma, the principles of Dharma, not only for purification, self-purification, but to simply be obedient to Krishna's laws and nature, prakriti. We don't want to be breaking the laws of nature, what Krishna so kindly set up here, prakriti. That's what Kapila Dev explains very systematically how prakriti is manifesting, and then comes to the subtleties, the manasa, the mind. And you see all yogis, different kinds of yogis, at least yogis who have some kind of authentic process. There are different kinds of yogis, obviously. They recognize the importance of controlling the mind. Even the Buddhists, for example, they're very much, especially the Buddhists, they're very particular about controlling the mind. Of course, the mind cannot be controlled by force. Mind can be controlled by engagement. Therefore, as I listed the 9 limbs of devotion service, Prahlad Maharaj explains it very nicely. It's in the 7th canto, chapter 5. You can read that chapter. Very important to understand the importance of controlling the mind and the importance of right engagement. So when we engage ourselves in devotion service, either by hearing and chanting and studying and serving the Vaishnavas, engage in all kinds of activities, regardless of the externals, the mind naturally absorbs in that, not in sense gratification, rather in that devotional activity, how to serve Krishna. Just like when you're cooking, or when you are doing something that you really need to focus, where you can't make mistakes, otherwise either you burn yourself or whatever. Or when you're running a managerial task or business, or you have to be very careful. You have to have a focus. You have to have clear mind. You have to make decisions. So it requires attention. So by giving attention, we're controlling our minds naturally. In the material world, people are very absorbed in the activities, but unfortunately, they absorbed in material activities, which does not help them. Maybe some temporary benefit, but that temporary benefit is not really meaningful from Vaishnava perspective, because temporary means temporary, asat. And I'd just like to quickly give a couple of examples here from Mahabharata, how Srila Prabhupada also explains in the Bhagavatam in different sections. For example, in Mahabharata, regarding the mind, acceptance and rejection, Arjuna's mind on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So, the problem, again, back to the basic equation, the mind born of false ego, ahankara. So it's a material thing. It's nothing to do with spiritual, nothing to do with the real self. The soul is encaged in this physical reality. So we have to now function. And function as a devotee, we have to controlling our minds and senses. And as you know, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was perplexed. Krishna, it's easier to control the wind than the activities of the mind. It's so subtle and so forceful. Therefore, Krishna recommends the process. And different processes, yoga of action, karma yoga, and then he explains gradually how you can hold on to the mind and use it carefully in the service of Krishna. And if you can do that, it can become the greatest friend also. And the devotees can utilize the intelligence and minds and, in the service of Krishna very effectively. So on the battlefield, Arjuna exemplifies manaha tattva, born of false ego. His mind was, how can I kill my relatives? So rejection. So he had these doubts. It's all born of false ego. His mind dictating this. What will happen to my family traditions? So accepting that. He's accepting that. I desire peace, not victory, karma. So there's a desire already. He desires. I reject this fight, vikalpa. So Arjuna's desires are not spiritual at this point. They arise from bodily identification, social ego, fear of suffering of relatives, imagined morality. So obviously thinking in these bodily relations, my family, my grandfather, the teachers, Dronacharya, all these personalities, is concerned about these things. So naturally, because we are human beings, we have these attachments, but his awareness and perception was still material, despite being learned, virtuous, and morally sensitive. So he's still held down by the mind. And his acceptance and rejection was based on material morality, or like you said, imagined morality. And Srila Prabhupada says also in the purport, however advanced a man is in academic qualifications, as long as he is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will simply accept and reject. So the second resolution, the same mind fixed by Krishna, what changes Arjuna? Not logic, not ethics, not renunciation. Sharanagati. As in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna Arjuna respond to Krishna. Shishyas te ham sadi mam tvam prapannam. Arjuna basically surrenders to Krishna. Krishna, please accept me as your disciple, because my mind, I cannot see things clearly. I'm accepting, rejecting, I'm attached to my family members. How can I be violent against them? And this, my Krishna reveals Divya Jnana systematically, gradually in the Bhagavad Gita. And the moment Arjuna offers his mind to Krishna, something remarkable happens. The same battlefield remains, same relatives remain, the same weapons remain, but the mind is fixed. Now sankalpa becomes, I shall act only for Krishna's pleasure. And vikalpa becomes, I reject everything unfavorable to his service. So the mind is still accepting, rejecting, but guided by Divya Jnana, transcendental knowledge. We accepting the favorable and reject the unfavorable. And even Rupa Goswami says, Upadeshamrita, one should reject the unfavorable and accept the favorable for the execution, for the successful execution of devotional service. So then Arjuna, how can I serve Krishna? How can I reject anything unfavorable for his for service? Arjuna's mind did not disappear. It was spiritualized. So the mind is still there. It's still acting the same way, accepting, rejecting, but accepting rather Krishna and rejecting anything illusory or against Dharma. Another good example, King Yudhishthira and King Duryodhana. Obviously, as we know, Duryodhana, his mind ruled by ego and desire. So his mind is still there, accepting, rejecting, but how it works? Duryodhana is a living embodiment of mind born from false ego. He accepts anything that increases his power. Very similar to Ravana, all the great Puranic stories, Hiranyakasipu. He rejects anything that threatens his supremacy. Even wise counsel from Bhishma, Drona, and Vidura rejected. So he rejects all the saintly association, the saintly teachers, Bhishma, the grandsire. He rejects him because of his feverish desire to be powerful and successful. So anything increases his power, a name, fame, he's accepting it. So you can see it works on a different level. Because his mind is serving ahankara, not dharma. Srila Prabhupada stated, quote, the mind manufactures its own truth. So we can see in the material world, people have convictions in their own belief system. Scientists, although, if we analyze it, they have no real foundation But the illusion is so strong that they convince themselves, manufacture their own truths, illusions. So they mistaken illusion to reality. Duryodhana's downfall was not fate. It was uncontrolled manaha tattva. So the mind was uncontrolled. Accepting anything is supports his ego, ahankara, power, and rejects anything which threatens that, especially saintly association or good advice. Yudhishthira, on the other hand, fixed mind in dharma and devotion. So Yudhishthira, a great devotee, Raja Rishi, very saintly personality, great pure Vaishnava in the Vedic context. Yudhishthira, by contrast, accepts tapasya, hardships, rejects personal comfort, tolerates injustice, never acts independently of Krishna's will. Even when tested by Yaksha and many other contexts in Mahabharata, Vana, Parva, his answers reveal a steady mind rooted in humility, dependence on the Supreme, moral clarity. This is the difference Kapila Dev highlights. One mind fluctuates endlessly, the other is anchored, controlled. Another example, Karna. The tragedy of an unfixed mind. Karna is especially instructive. This is a very interesting one here. He was charitable, heroic, brave, loyal. Yet, his mind was enslaved by false ego. So he has good qualities. There's some good qualities. Charitable. Duryodhana was very charitable also. Heroic, being a kshatriya, brave, loyal, ambitious, power. But his mind was enslaved by false ego. Desire for recognition, resentment toward the Pandavas, attachment to Duryodhana's validation. Thus he accepted adharma, not dharma, adharma, rejected righteousness, even rejected Krishna himself when offered mercy. This shows a profound truth. Good qualities cannot save an unfixed mind. Only Krishna consciousness can. And like I mentioned a few times, the 9 limbs of devotional service is so important to understand. Any of those can help to control the mind, but for as practitioners, sadhakas, who are just learning the art of devotion, these mechanical steps are very important. And we combine these 9 processes, 9 limbs of devotional service, especially hearing and chanting, in the association of Vaishnavas, obviously. And then it's a very powerful way of holding on to the mind and controlling it and employing it, engaging it in Krishna service. Then the mind becomes very creative. It becomes actually very tamed. Just like you see, wild animals can be tamed. The mind is like a wild animal otherwise. And we tame the mind, then becomes very useful, very powerful. That's why you can see that so many devotees, even within society of Vaishnavas, there's so many intelligent devotees, very creative, innovative. They're pushing on the Sankirtan mission. There's so beautiful when the mind is utilized in Krishna service. But of course, the mind has to be trained and educated also with knowledge, jnana. We cannot just think that we can just grab the mind like that. We have to follow the process carefully. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, always hearing and chanting, remembering. Srila Prabhupada often in morning walk and dream conversations, he says, the mind as a drunken monkey. a drunken monkey bitten by a scorpion and haunted by a ghost. So uncontrolled mind is very dangerous. Crazy, actually. And you can see the animals, they have to be controlled. There have to be some kind of control process, either by verbal or by some instrument or rope. They have to be controlled, because if you control them, they can be very useful to us. But they don't have the rationale or rational clarity or intelligence to see, to distinguish which is favorable, which is unfavorable. They don't have that capacity. But they can be tamed, they can be trained, so they can be very useful for a purpose. So this examples that even in great personalities like Yudhishthira, Duryodhana, Karna, they're very powerful personalities. Kshatriyas, they're very powerful. They're not just weak persons. They still had issue with their minds. They still had to have some level of acceptance to Dharma, superior knowledge. And generally that comes down from authorities, Mahajanas. Therefore we study the Shastras, because we want real knowledge by which we can subdue the mind. There's a process for it, and the mind can be useful for our purpose, really, to remain on the path of devotional service and be effective and do great service to Krishna. If we control the minds nicely, then we can do great service to our spiritual masters, we can be effective, we can be productive. So the symptoms of a controlled mind is very positive, very attractive. Uncontrolled mind can be very dangerous, even amongst ourselves. We can make offenses to one another. We can do so many things which are not really moral or ethical. So we have to be very careful. Vigilance is very important. So controlling the mind. So there's so much to say about the mind, the nature of the mind. There's a whole psychology behind this. And even modern psychology recognizing this. The importance of somehow or other train the mind, tame the mind, because it can be uncontrolled. And these are all kinds of issues, psychological issues, manifest. They have difficulties. People, do crazy things. Psychological, psychopathic. You can see there are so many different levels of psychosis, really. Psychopathic, very dangerous ones, because they absolutely no control of their emotions. So they can harm others, not only themselves, but they can harm others also. Just see the uncontrolled mind. And you see in this world, in this mundane reality, Kali Yuga, the mind is completely out of control, the human mind. And we are constantly bombarded with sensuality and temptations and propaganda and all that. Because even the people who run the society or so-called civilization, they're also uncontrolled. So they're running the whole world on that uncontrolled mind and senses. Very difficult to get out of it, unless we accept the superior process. This means we can hang on to Krishna's teachings. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains it very clearly. In the process and the nature of the mind, controlling it, very important. Because without controlling our minds and senses, we cannot actually make any advancement in spiritual life. So we have to constantly remember this. If we don't control our minds, it's very difficult to make any advancement. There's no way we can really tap into higher emotions or feelings of love and all the beautiful emotions what Rupa Goswami explains very nicely in many of his writings, especially Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. He very nicely explains the different levels of bhakti, devotion. So to do that, even just to touch those emotions, we have to already have a sane consciousness, very pure. Because we're not so pure, there has to be a mechanical process to control the mind. If you're very pure, the mind is already at Krishna's lotus feet, with great attachment, great love. But because we're not so attached to Krishna, we're just touching those realms. And of course, very inspiring, because Krishna consciousness is very inspiring. But that's not enough. We have to actually control the mind mechanically every day. Practice. And when Arjuna accepted Krishna, he accepted Dharma. And then he realized that Krishna's authority, Krishna's guidance is the ultimate guiding force. And that guiding force comes down through the parampara for us, through our teachers. So we take shelter of our spiritual masters, our authorities, and follow the process attentively, carefully. Then our minds will be tamed. We can actually do some service to Krishna nicely, effectively, qualitatively. And this is very important for all of us. So this is what I can say about this verse. Is there any comments or questions? Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Kapila Deva ki jai. Srila Vyasa Deva ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.